Hey everyone, welcome to the Silicon Alley Podcast. I'm your host, William Glass, CEO and co-founder of Ostrich. And on the Silicon Alley Podcast, we talk all things entrepreneurship and sit down with entrepreneurs to hear their stories as the journey of building a business unfolds. And on today's episode, I have a very special guest, Yotam Hadass, who I actually met at a meetup here in New York City before the whole COVID thing struck. And he was on a panel about how to build an engineering team. And there's a couple things that really stuck out, which is why I asked Yotam to be on the podcast. The two things are that he's really focused on the people aspect. And a lot of the other panelists and the questions that were being asked were very focused on how do you have, the best product or have the most productive teams or make sure people are doing their work or all those sorts of things. And Yotam's approach was very, very people oriented, which really resonated with me. And you could tell from the incredible things that he's done in his career and what he's been able to do with teams and accomplish as a team lead for engineers that it does work. And so I want to share that with you. And I'm really excited that Yotam sat down. And the other piece is that he has built remote teams. And right now, with everything going on with COVID, remote teams are essentially the way that every business is working right now. Except for those essential businesses that have to be in person. And so it's really, really relevant, especially as the effects of COVID after we get through this pandemic. You know that remote work is going to be a big part of our lives. And Yotam has really great experience building remote teams and optimizing them and has strategies for how you can do that as well. So I'm really, really excited to sit down with Yotam. I know you're going to love this episode. There's a ton of valuable nuggets. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Yotam Hadass, the VP of Engineering at Electric. Welcome to the Silicon Alley Podcast. Super excited to have you on and hear a little bit more about your story.
I'm excited as well.
Perfect. Well, we actually met at a panel. So Yotam was giving a talk around engineering and how to build a great engineering team. And that's something that you have a lot of experience with. And so we actually met at a meetup in New York City.
Yeah, that's right. I've gone through team building iterations in various forms, various roles. And so I had a few thoughts to say about that and I was very excited by that panel.
Yeah, it was a lot. I took away a lot of value from that. And one of the things that really stood out to me specifically was your focus on people. So while the conversation was how to build a great engineering team, a lot of folks focused on all the other aspects, but your focus was really on how to actually build the team at the core, which really resonated with me. So, tell us a little bit about who you are and your background and what your story is.
Yeah. Who am I? Wow. I don't know that I've ever figured that out, but my story starts in Israel. I am Israeli. That's where I grew up and lived still the larger portion of my life. I got into software first as a kid, just learning code from a book, as many 80s kids did. And then sort of stumbled upon a QA job, work as QA engineer part-time, when I was in my late teens, maybe 19 years old or something like that. And that evolved into a career in software. So that's the beginning of it. I spent the first 10 years of my career in Israel with various roles and grew to be a manager and a head of function for the first time, and a couple great journeys there. And then the last 13 years, I've been living in the US, the whole time in Brooklyn. Rebuilt my career in many ways, kind of restarted, learned how it is to work here in a software company, American culture in general. Mm-hmm. And as I felt more confident, I sort of retraced my career back from individual contributor roles to management and finally to this executive position that I am in right now.
Awesome. Yeah, I appreciate that overview. So what was it like, I guess folks today, when they're learning coding now, there's all these different resources and things like that. What was it like to, I guess, learn from a book and like what sparked your interest in software and engineering?
Yeah, I think as a kid, it was just a revolution when PCs started getting into homes. It was this wonderful, magical thing that our parents had no clue what it was about, and any activity we did with it, any learning, any playing was for them this strange thing. which made it, I think, pretty magical. And so for me to be able to operate a computer and have a conversation with it in certain ways was absolutely awesome as a child. And then I studied it a little bit more rigorously in high school, and sort of kept in touch with it throughout my teens, even as I was interested in a whole
Mm.
bunch of other things. And so to finally be able to work at that at first, the first couple of years, first I was very young, but also it was so new and it just felt like this dream job, just getting to play with software and find what works and what doesn't work as a QA engineer is a really great start. I think to
Yeah.
anyone's career, really, QA is a great first step. And then being able to write code professionally and learn from books, learn from people, not having the college education for it was really special. I've always enjoyed that, and it gave me kind of a path on how you get into something you have no knowledge in, how you teach yourself, how you use other resource, mentorships especially, which I still value and appreciate. And
Yeah.
just in general, understanding the journey that people go through as they learn, doesn't matter their seniority or position. And I think I try to bring some of that spirit, knowledge, sensitivity, really into team building, as you mentioned, kind of
Yeah.
having people's focus.
Yeah. I like that a lot. You know, being able to create your own path and carve out something that interests you and be a part of this revolution. What you know, you mentioned earlier as well the transition from Israel to the US and that you had to sort of reinvent your career. Can you talk to me a little bit about that specifically?
Yeah, definitely. Um, as a teenager, first with my father, prior to my military service, which is mandatory in Israel, we did this 1 week trip to New York that was really transformative. I really fell in
Mhm.
love with the city and the culture and the diversity. And so throughout my 20s, I was just waiting for an opportunity to come live in New York just as an experience. And that opportunity finally came with the excuse of a master's program in creative writing that I got into at the New School in New York. But I think the first priority was just to have this experience, live somewhere else, somewhere bigger.
Yeah.
And so that's how it started. And when I finished with my master's, I wanted to get back to software. I think the experience was, well, I don't know how things work here. If I was to
Yeah.
continue my career and just be a head of function or even a manager at any level, I thought it'd be pretty strange just not knowing how companies function, what the culture is, what the
Mhm.
operations like. My English wasn't very good at the time. And so for all those reasons, I was looking to get back a little bit to coding, be an individual contributor, learn over time, see what I have to offer, see what direction might work in that stage of my career.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it took a few positions and a whole bunch of years to sort of get back to maybe a similar position where I was in Israel and beyond.
Nice. Okay. And so it's interesting because you've got this love of software, but you're also art history and creative writing and into that whole world. Can you talk to me a little bit about like the creativity combined with sort of the logic that goes into software and engineering?
Yeah, for sure. Um, yeah, I think I'm a little bit of a Renaissance person, more so knowing a little bit about many things rather than necessarily being an expert or the best at any one thing. Um, Also being left-handed with a little bit of a extra right brain, so some of the creative tendencies were always there. I was always a reader and a little bit of a amateur, mediocre writer. And yeah, I cared about art, creativity in different forms, language. And so when my career was fairly secure, maybe my fourth or fifth year of my career, I felt like, okay, I could do this. It's working. I'm an engineer. And I wanted to go to college. I just chose something really just for fun.
Yeah.
And I think being in creative programs and having that sort of humanist spirit a little bit that comes with learning, art history is a little bit of art, but it's also a ton of just history and society and religion and a whole bunch of other things.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think just that well-rounded state of mind and having different perspectives over one thing has really helped me both with software design, but also more so with team building and people leadership.
That's awesome. Yeah. Being able to blend those different worlds, I think is huge. and makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's fun for me. I'm sure there's also some glaring disadvantages, maybe sometimes lack of focus or in-depth knowledge about certain areas, but yeah, that's sort of my nature, so I let it be.
There you go. Exactly. So you get to the US, you've reinvented yourself, you've worked your way back up, you're feeling confident. What's that journey from going from an individual contributor to leading teams? And you've got some interesting stories at a couple different startups. So let's jump into that.
Yeah. Feeling confident, maybe not always.
Okay.
Yeah. I think it's good. It's good to acknowledge, there's always lack of confidence, no matter what position you're in, how many years you've done something. I am definitely unconfident quite often. But let's see how it went. Um, so it started with a small startup by the name of WeBook. It was a really, really great product, great vision around creating collaboration between writers, and kind of blended my interest in both writing and software at the same time.
Yeah.
It was pretty small. I think we were maybe 5 engineers at most on the team, and had this experience of early stage startup, trying to build a community of users because it was a B2C product, and then also trying to figure out how the hell we make money out of that. Which we never did. We never quite made money out of it, and in the end, money ran out, and we had to close shop. But it was a great experience trying to do something like this, and it gave me what I wanted as far as understanding the culture, both in New York and the US in general, and software companies.
Yeah.
And I think it's always in your career, everything leaves something. And from there, other than learning some technology, especially database technologies, which I wasn't very good at before that position, and it gave me a lot of the foundation I have today just by chance. But also I had a great manager, and he happened to one day, 2 or 3 years later, say, "Hey, I know the CEO who's looking for a VP of engineering. I think you'd really hit it off. Why don't you talk to him?" Which ended up getting me to StructuredWeb, which was a very, very meaningful
Yeah.
stop in my career. So yeah, I think that's how it works. You always get something out of it, not always what you expect.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I like that. Yeah. Being open to the opportunities, because yeah, you never really know what they can lead to.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So okay, so you've now moved into this, leading a team, VP of engineering. What was it like to lead? Because you mentioned the not feeling confident, and even today, there's times where you don't feel confident. What about that transition specifically? Because that's a big difference, and especially when you talk about engineering teams and just different personalities that you get. I think that's a huge piece, and something that we talked about on the panel is the people side of that. So how did you make that transition?
Yeah. Um, yeah. So, I mean, it was the second time in my career that I've done that transition. The first one
Okay.
being in Israel, and Serene Technologies, this amazing company. Maybe at some point we'll talk about it.
Okay.
But sort of repeating that transition, I think a few things came up for me. One, just this deep need to remember and show people that I remember what it
Okay.
is to be an individual contributor, and not always having a say or the ability to make decisions, just really focusing on that sort of humble side of leadership, just remembering, hey,
Yeah.
there's people here that count on me to provide for them what they need. I play a role in their professional happiness. They are by and large better than me than almost at almost anything they do. And if I can just remember that, I remind myself what my role is, to bring alignment and to bring resources and to create an operation that they could focus on what they
Yeah.
do best around. So I think just reminding myself that every day gave me a little bit of confidence, and showed me over time the things that I am good at, the things that I am maybe unique at as a leader,
Okay.
and try to focus on those things. And then the things that I discovered pretty quickly that I'm not that good at, um, just try to be transparent. And, hey, this is actually a weakness of mine. Can you help me with this? Or I see that you are good at that. Do you want to take over? And just try to be openly vulnerable so that I get the support I need.
Yeah. I like that. I like that a lot.
being open, and you specifically use the term show, which I think is important as a leader, is showing folks what to do and how to be helpful versus telling them what to do or how to do it. So I think that's a really important term that I wanted to pick out that you used.
Yeah, I agree.
So how do you instill confidence in yourself if you're not feeling confident, or you have someone on your team who's not feeling confident? What are some strategies or techniques that you use?
I try to find the source. It's almost like a meditative process a little bit, trying to look at the fear or the source of anxiety and try to ask myself, what is it really? Like, let's sort it out and put things in buckets and find the ones that are the bigger and the more meaningful source of lack of confidence. And typically it shows up in a form of lack of knowledge. You're unconfident, you're uncertain because there's some knowledge you don't have.
Okay.
And so once I can identify that source, I'll just go and try to get that knowledge, right? By reading, by talking to people, by finding mentors and advisors that I trust and I know are knowledgeable in that field, or just by talking to my teammates. You're like, hey, I have this problem I'm supposed to lead. I have no clue how. Here's the stuff I don't know. Let's talk about it. I think once you identify what you don't know and you're able to get support or to put yourself on a path to knowledge, you become confident and things go better.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, being vocal about the things that you don't know, or the lack of information that you're missing. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense. So let's get back to your journey. So where do you go after that second VP role, leading an engineering team? What's the next step?
So the next step, the both engineering teams that I've led, one in Israel and one in New York, were both relatively small.
Okay.
I would say up to 20 people in product and engineering. And so the next thing I thought I needed was experience with much larger teams.
Okay.
And so it made sense to take a role. At the time I was as a director rather than a head of function and reporting to a CTO or a senior director. And that opportunity came in the form of WorkMarket, which was at the time a startup. Now it was acquired by ADP early in 2018.
Yeah.
Still doing really well. The team there is intact and doing great things. And so me joining WorkMarket was a great chance to see a team grow, I think from about 50, 60-ish engineers to almost 100.
Wow.
And just being able to take part in that. Of course, a fraction of those 100, maybe 25 at peak, were reporting to me, or 30 or something like that.
Okay.
But I still got to do a lot for the group of the 100, figure out operation, figure out agile development, be part of a team that got a SOC 2 certificate and was in a security council and was for a little while in charge of professional development budget for the entire product engineering team. And so just learning how an operation works for a team that's already scaled a little bit was absolutely huge. And then the chance to learn from some great leaders, the CTOs there, the CPO, also some other people in executive functions, was really career changing for me. So that's awesome. I'm super happy I took that on.
That makes sense. So what were some of the differences or nuances between leading small teams versus much larger teams?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's the maturity of operation. When the team is small, you can keep things a little more thin, have less checkpoints, be a little bit less organized, and you're still okay. Typically in a small team, each person takes on multiple roles and multiple hats. I've had in StructuredWeb, where I was VP of engineering, I've had only full stack engineers. And so each of them, in a sense, was its own little software company. They could take on any project. They could do it start to finish. We would collaborate a lot more loosely.
Okay.
In a larger team, if you don't have a decent operation, typically there's chaos. Sometimes it manifests itself in a form of quality issues and instability of the platform, unhappy customers, and so on. Other times it's more the team members that feel unhappy. They don't have what they need. They waste their time on things that are not outright what they want to focus on because the organization around it is not there. And so you just have to be a lot more thoughtful on how you're going to manage the operation, how you're going to do cross-team collaboration, how you're going to run anything from CI/CD to product design process that can work for 10 to 12 Scrum teams about the same way, still leaving them some freedom, but having a skeleton that you can always use and repeat that give people a little bit of peace of mind so they can focus on their actual job.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. Do you have a general sense of when things start to break down, when you start to go from being, it's okay to be a little loose and less organized on a small team to, okay, we've now hit the kind of tipping point where we've got to get our operations a little bit more hammered out?
Yeah, I think it is a direct function of your customers' expectations. So when you're small, when you're a startup, when you're really dynamic, can adjust quickly, typically the customers would be expecting about that. And when you're a little more mature and the customers are long-term with you or paying you more money or running more of their operation on top of your platform, then every little instability is a big deal.
Yeah.
And you hear it, you feel it in your CSAT and in the feedback that you get from your customers, and the shift from here are a couple of new shiny features and everyone's happy, the shift to it's nice that you have new features, but first we need stability. We need the existing functionality to not break.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense. That makes sense. That's a nice way to look at it from the customer's view rather than the internal of, okay, we've hit just X number of people or, you know, we're at this phase. So I like that. I think that's a good way to view it, to view it. So you're at WorkMarket and got the experience leading a bigger team. What happens next?
What happens next? So I think the ADP acquisition was as good as acquisition as can be.
Yeah.
It's acquisition of a product, but no less of a team.
Okay.
Because ADP wanted the team. They kept investing in it. And we did our thing by and large, especially with product engineering. And so it was a very, very good experience in 2018 and in 2019 as well. But there was a point where I felt like I could do a little bit more. I could lead once again, get to a head of function position and see if I can take all this experience of near 3 years and learn both how to do that on my own, but also how to be part of an executive team in a slightly more mature company that I have been before, because I was not on the executive team at WorkMarket. And so when Electric found me after a few short conversations, I realized that the fit was just so incredibly good. What they needed and what I wanted to be doing and thought I could do was really just perfect. And coupled the fit with the really great chemistry with pretty much everyone I interviewed with and talked to, it was an opportunity that I could not say no to.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So back at Electric, and I know we've talked a little bit about this offline, having a wonderful experience. And one of the things that I think is really unique that we haven't touched on is sort of how you've been able to build an engineering team and specifically been doing a lot with remote teams. So I'm curious to how that comes about, and if you could talk a little bit about that piece specifically.
Yeah, that seems as relevant as anything these days, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Remote teams, remote culture, asynchronous work. Yeah, I've been fascinated by that for years, really. And at WorkMarket, we had a team in Canada, which was absolutely fantastic and ran, as independently and as well as the New York teams. It was a wonderful experience, really. I used to look forward to my short trips to Canada that I used to make about once a quarter.
Yeah.
So that was a fantastic experience, and I saw what works and what doesn't work, how much communication is needed to keep remote teams working well. Also the value of a good operation that people on both ends understand and sort of blindly understand each other and know what's going on at any given point, both
Yeah.
because of good communication and because of good tooling, good use of technology. Yeah, so that was where most of my experience with remote teams came from. I had a couple before, but maybe not as meaningful.
Okay.
And so when I joined Electric, we've had a team in Argentina. I split New York and Argentina. And what I saw pretty quickly is that there's a lot of great people on both ends, great talent, great motivation. But some of the culture and operation wasn't quite there yet.
Okay.
And so I think when things are missing at that level, what the symptoms are typically is maybe you can tell some people are not fulfilling their potential. They could do more, but there's not enough collaboration, or maybe even trust is not fully there. One side feels like they're doing more, another side feels like they're doing too little. Whatever it is, I could tell the problem was not the people, it's just the communication pipelines and culture.
Yeah.
And so we worked on that really hard, really put focus on that to get feedback from the teams. I personally talked to every single individual on the team just to understand their experience, specifically around remote culture and what could be done better. And then over time with leaders on both sides, we started making things better. We started giving it attention in every one-on-one and every team meeting, talking and changing and trying to create better communication pipelines, better trust, better ways to run a development experience as a whole.
Yeah.
And I think it peaked with this trip to Argentina that we luckily took before COVID became, a real thing around the Western Hemisphere. We took this trip really not that long ago, about 2 months ago. That was just wonderful. One of the best business trips I've ever taken. Just spending a week with the team there and talking and, all hands forums, as well as specific pods, as well as one-on-ones. And then outside the office, just dinners and social events, just getting to know people, seeing who they are, getting some intimate conversations.
Yeah.
It's just amazing to me to see how much that adds later to in some way to like every single line of code that's written is like touched by that experience and by the better communication, by the deep remote culture that we have now. And so, that's just a wonderful thing to work on.
That's awesome. Yeah. So how important is that in remote work? Just that the I guess communication and maybe culture around communication. How important is that when you're building a remote team?
I think it's as important as any, architectural decision you might make.
Okay.
I think development process relies on communication. If you look at any agile board any team ever followed, it has a few transitions, statuses and transitions. And those transitions almost always require communication.
Yeah.
You have to understand what happened between step A to step B so that the person taking things from B to C is well informed and aligned. And so it's a daily thing. It's a matter of clear communication and openness and having the right forums to say, this is going great, expect that. Or this is not going great, I need help with this. And for people to be able to do that, you just need that level of support, openness and a safe culture, over communication when that's needed, sensitivity to language barriers when those exist, just to make sure that never stops us and we don't leave anyone behind just because of that. And then I think everything that you do, your stand-ups, your ceremonies, code sessions that you do, reviews, is really every single technological thing is affected by how well you communicate around it, and how supportive the culture is. And so I think it's as big as anything that's purely technological for a software team.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense, right? Especially if you are working remote, it becomes even more important if you're not able to have that face-to-face communication and those one-off sort of things that happen when you're in the same office or environment. If someone's trying to especially right now with everything that's going on with COVID and just everything's essentially remote right now.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to folks that were just like trying to put together their first team, or figure out how to build an engineering team in this environment?
Yeah. Wow.
I know
Yeah,
it's a
it's just
tough question, right?
anytime I stop to think about what's going on right now, I'm just sort of overwhelmed by
Yeah.
how crazy it is, and trying to look at the good things that's happening. And I think that's one of them. What this did to remote culture and remote work is maybe the single silver lining of this whole episode.
Yeah.
So yeah, advice. You have to figure out how that's going to work with your team. Right? Take someone like me. I've done remote work for years. Still, I know nothing. If I walk into a room with a new team, I shouldn't, and other leaders shouldn't think that they know the answers to how stuff should work. And
Okay.
instead, building remote culture is first talking to people and hearing about their experience and their needs right now in this moment, in this particular team with this particular business. And so take time to let people think about it and run sort of a series of interviews or feedback loops to learn what people need to successfully work remotely, what support they need, what tools they need, what processes they need, whatever it may be.
Mm-hmm.
And then based on that feedback, I think it's better to be proactive as much as possible early on. Later, you could be a little more fluid and a little more maybe flexible or improvise more. But early on, I would be more proactive and more thoughtful, more directly bring up remote culture as a subject within any forum, leadership meeting, a team meeting, one-on-ones, and just continue to hear feedback on how people feel when they're remote, when they don't have access to verbal conversation.
Yeah.
See what else needs to be changed so that your meetings are more effective, communication's more effective, really technological support and coding and design and architectural choices and deployment, whatever it is, has the right support as far as communication and culture, so that your team feels as much as possible as comfortable as they would be in the office.
Gotcha. No, that makes a lot of sense. Is that mainly, I guess there's different ways that you can communicate. Is that like setting up Zoom calls and doing video calls to check in on folks? Is it emails? Is it a combination of all these different things? How do you do that, especially if you're already remote?
Yeah, I think it's a combination. I think it's a very, very individual thing.
Okay.
For me, it's definitely a mix. It could be a random, just slacking someone and asking how they're doing. Asking, more of a personal question rather than, how's your project going? When are you delivering this? But instead asking, how are you feeling? How's the team doing? How do you feel like the atmosphere is? Is there anything I can help with? Is there anything missing for you now that you're remote? I could do that over video. I can do that over Slack or chat. Yeah, and I think for others, maybe some more structure, some less structure is needed, right?
Okay.
Some people would do that really well, just more randomly within a team meeting or wherever else. For me, I think just being a little more organized and knowing I have a touch point with whoever it is that I need to talk to, whether it's monthly or weekly or over chat or whatever the solution is, I think matters less.
Okay.
You just sort of have to find your own system based on what works for you.
Yeah.
And just make sure you iterate on it. It's probably my single favorite word as far as agile goes, is iteration, because it doesn't matter if you're thinking in an agile fashion about coding, about operation, about anything in business. It's the fact that whatever it is you think works, you don't just decide that and forget, but rather iterate and get more feedback and have the points in time that you look into something and ask yourself, is it working? Can it be better?
Yeah.
And make sure that is not something you do on your own, but rather through a feedback loop.
Yeah. I like that. Yeah. That continuous improvement, right? That's a mantra within Agile, is continuously improving, right? It's never just done.
Yeah, to me, that's a special part about agile, more important than some of the more sort of engineering related aspects of it.
Yeah, yeah, the human side of it. I like that. Especially when building teams and just how important that is. Cool. So I want to transition a little bit and talk a little bit about personal finance. So I'm curious, especially since grew up in Israel and spent majority of your life in Israel and now have transitioned to the US. How would you describe your relationship with money?
Yeah, I think it's a very, very careful one, a little bit conservative. I grew up in a home where there was always financial trouble. We never did terribly. I had what I needed, and it was nothing out of the ordinary, but there was always a little bit of trouble. It was always a source of tension. Um, and so as I grew up, I sort of felt like, okay, what is my financial goal? Is probably just to never be in debt. Rather than having some goal, which I'm sure many people have, and is probably better, which is, hey, let's make some money, let's be safer, let's invest. Mine was just let's not owe anything ever. And so
That's a good rule. Yeah.
yeah, I sort of early on just focused on living according to my means, and was trying very hard to never take loans, never buy in installments. Either I could pay for something or I wouldn't buy it. Um, and yeah, sort of, I think not necessarily for good reasons. Some of it was really a certain psychological barrier in trying to change the state of mind into one of investment and growth. Mine for many years was more so as just, let's be okay. Let's make sure we're okay, have some reserves, but not beyond that.
Yeah.
And I think, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say that makes sense. If you grew up in a household, or growing up, things weren't never bad, but there was always tension. It makes sense that you would develop that mindset of, okay, let's make sure that I'm okay. Yeah. So,
yeah,
go ahead.
I think, yeah, as the year went by and I got a little bit older, a little bit more secure, I started paying more attention and thinking, how do I start investing in some form? How do I get to a point where I can own my own apartment rather than pay rent? I think these questions and thoughts that some people maybe have a little younger, only came to me sort of maybe mid 30s, maybe a little after, sort of when I felt like, okay, I'm okay, everything's okay. Let's try to think a little more creatively and a little more long term. And so, yeah, really, most of the major financial moves that I've made with my family were really just in recent years, maybe the past 5 years.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, does it have anything to do with the age of your boys by chance? Did that factor into the thinking? Okay, well, I need to grow and all that.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. Not just their age, really their existence. Right? When you're in charge of other people, there's a certain weight on your shoulder, and certain thoughts come in that you maybe didn't have before. Thinking, okay, how do I help them with their future? Can never guarantee anything, but try to build some financial reserve, some sources that would help support them and maybe give them just a little bit more than I had to start with.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you get to the 40 mark, and all of a sudden, I don't know, 60 feels closer. It's pretty far, but the thoughts about 60 come, the thoughts about retirement and pension.
Yeah.
Older age. Yeah, 40 is sort of, for me at least, just that definitely has some mystical power in changing my mindset, and finance is definitely a big one.
Big piece of that.
Yeah.
Cool. What was there anything specific about when you transitioned, when you moved from Israel to the US, that like, was there a learning curve? And obviously different cultures, but like a learning curve there specifically?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, funny anecdote. The first thing is taxes, right? And like, wait, what? I have to do what every year? In Israel, it's just taken out of your paycheck, and there's no annual process. There's nothing you really have to do. And
Oh, okay.
so that was a bit of a shock. Just, oh, wait, this is how much money came in this year and how much money went out and how it's calculated, and having to be more thoughtful and how I could optimize things, both to keep track and to, I guess, take advantage of whatever I'm allowed to.
Yeah.
So I think that was a major thing. You know, it's small, right? It takes a few days a year, but it's still a pretty big mindset change.
Yeah.
And then beyond that, yeah, just hearing people, I guess, closer here to both the startup world and investments and stock market, whatever else, which is still big, huge in Israel. Like, people are financially smart and all this activity, of course, happens. But coming here, maybe I was just a little more attuned to it, and a little older in age, so also a little more open.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it took a few years to figure out how things work and how people think.
Yeah. Anything else just outside of finance, just, nuances that you had to to deal with as you moved and adjusted?
Yeah, I mean, the first couple of years I was on a student visa, and so
Okay.
I couldn't work, except for on campus in a very limited frame. So that was an experience of living for 2 years with very, very little income, and
Wow.
thinking how you manage the money so that it lasts. And I had, just about enough, sort of, to last. But I had to be very thoughtful about it and really think, where do I live and how much rent I pay and how much money I spend on food,
Yeah.
in a way that I did not have to be that conscious living in Israel and having a full-time job.
Yeah.
And so that was, I think, a really good experience, kind of getting to the 2-year mark and surviving financially. And then about the same time, I don't know, within 2 years of graduating, I also got married and I had a child and I had a green card after a while. And so that was quite a dramatic shift in
Yeah.
financial thinking and needs and responsibility. And so I think learning how that worked was also a very valuable journey. I think it has a lot of something you would appreciate, which is the emotional side of finance, just
Yeah.
noticing how I'm feeling in certain situations and why I'm making certain choices, even long-term choices, and seeing that other than just the mathematical aspect, there's always an emotional side. There's always a factor there that drives my decisions, and I can choose when to challenge it.
Yeah.
I can also choose when to think, you know what, this just makes me feel better, so I'm going to do this, and I'm okay with it, even if it doesn't maximize my opportunity or my yield.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I'm glad you brought that up, the emotional side, because I think that's something that we just, for whatever reason, when we talk about finances, it all of a sudden becomes black and white of, this, how do we optimize, get the highest return without thinking about, well, what do I need to feel comfortable, to feel safe, or just enjoy certain things. So that's huge. Yotam, what advice would you give to someone that wanted to follow in your footsteps? They want to, lead an engineering team. Maybe they're not ready to go out to be an entrepreneur. They're not interested in that, but they want to, lead teams and lead organizations. What advice would you have for someone like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. It reminds me a little bit of advice I can give to parents, which is none of us parents knows what we're doing. There really isn't any one particular way that works for everyone. It just doesn't exist. And so any expert opinion, have it inspire you, but don't feel like you have to pick it up in full, which is true to, a few pieces of advice that I'm about to give. But one is, try to integrate yourself as a professional person and a private person. There really isn't separate personas, right? We are one person, one mind. And so as you're trying to find who you are as a leader, give space to all those aspects of your personality. It's sometimes that things that you think are strong about you become a weakness because a strength sometimes makes you blind or less open to change or to other opinions.
Yeah.
And then it's sometimes that what you perceive as your weakness is actually a strength because it makes you different or because it brings something to the table that's not so common. And so find who you are as a whole and try to bring integrity and openness and vulnerability into leadership.
Yeah.
I think that keeps you in touch with people. It makes you more useful to them and in turn more successful as a leader. So I'd say that's the first thing.
Okay.
Second and third, second would be professional and third would be business. So professional around technology, being a technological leader, or if other people that are listening have different expertise, be it product or marketing or anything, find out within your profession, same thing, your strengths and weaknesses. And where you're strong, it means you can bring more thought leadership and ideology and guidance. And when you're not, where you're not so strong, just, hire the right people to help you and just let them know, hey, I'm not so great at this. It seems like you are. Let me learn from you. Let me give you the stage.
Yeah.
Let me give you resource and space and time, and you will do your thing and blossom, and I'll get to celebrate that with you and acknowledge you, and we'll all grow. So that's my approach. Just know what you know and what you don't, and keep open and get help. And then the third thing, we all operate within business context, right? Every company starts by one person going to another and telling them, hey, if you give me X amount of money, I'll give you Y amount of return, and here's how I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
So the premise, whether we like it or not, is always a business premise. And so I think to be successful as a leader, you have to understand how business works. It's beyond your profession always. You have to learn other people's profession. You have to understand finance to a degree. You have to know how any company works. And if you're in a software company, particularly how a software company works, to know how the company positions itself, what's unique about its product, what is its sales strategy, what are people telling customers on the phone every week in their check-ins within account management. Just really understand how business operates in general, how your particular company operates and thinks, and see how you can support that on top of being a leader for your profession, in my case, technology engineering. I'm also trying to just be an executive, think with the executive team, create a chemistry with everyone, give from my experience. And so that general business focus, mission focus, customer focus, I don't think I did that really well early in my career. And the better I got at it, the more successful I think my leadership became.
Gotcha. Okay. Do you have any examples of how you improved that, specifically the business aspect?
Yeah. It's just, I just went and asked questions.
Okay.
With a lot of intent, with a lot of structure. I would put one-on-ones on calendars of leaders and people that are strong in their profession anytime I could, anytime they were willing to give their time. I took upon myself to learn, read books, take some online tutorials, whatever it may be, to really understand business. I think that made all the difference. I learned from Jeff Wald, is a president and founder of WorkMarket, who's still with ADP. Just from, it wasn't even that often, like monthly one-on-ones with him, every 45 minutes that I spent with him was as much learning that I could get, in 3 months trying to randomly search things and read articles. And the same is true with some other folks, right? Marketing people, salespeople.
Yeah.
It definitely in my 4 months with Electric, a ton of that has happened. I, in no shape or form, figured things out already and probably never will. And so continuing to do that, no matter what position you are in, take someone to lunch, spend half an hour when they can afford to, and just really, really learn business deeply so that you can be a good partner to that.
Yeah. That curiosity, asking questions. I love that. Love that.
Yeah, for sure.
So jump into this last set of questions. Yotam, what is the best investment you've made?
I think it might be my apartment, really. It's funny, right? There's so many complicated things you can do with finance, but it ends up that sometimes just real estate is
Yeah.
you buy something and wait a few years, and if you are in the right geography, you're probably doing as well as you could do anywhere. And so I think, taking on a mortgage, which for me was, as we said, emotionally very difficult just to have any kind of loan, was at the end of the day probably a very smart move. And in the few years that we have this little apartment in Brooklyn, it's been maybe 5 years, it's probably worth, more. The difference in percentage is bigger than it would have been if I tried to make any other such investment. So yeah,
that's awesome. That's awesome. Getting over that fear of debt.
Yeah.
Seems to have paid off.
Or in this case, just jumping in without getting over it.
There it is. Yeah, that's true. I guess. Yeah, that's it. In spite of the fear, or in spite of the.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What would you say is the best and worst part of leading a team?
I think the best part is witnessing people grow. When somebody is really blossoming and you see that they're doing incredible work, they're doing new things they've never done before, they're getting appreciation, they're getting growth in their career. To me, that's the most satisfying part.
Yeah.
The worst part, I think, when things don't go well culturally, either a team is not doing well internally, as clashes, or lack of communication, not to mention toxicity. That's probably the hardest, along with dealing with performance issues. I don't think ever gets fun in your career. And it never feels great. There's an element there that's, unfair or just difficult. And it's also a skill that you need to be able to do that. And so it's really not fun. And I have some, difficult memories from having to do that several times. But the way I try to twist that is knowing that when you have to let go of someone, when you have to move on, it's almost always a situation that's not good for both sides. And it's just one side realizes it sooner. And so it almost always ends, and you could see that, right? It ends with the person rebounding and finding a better situation for them than they had before.
Yeah.
But yeah, certainly not a great thing to deal with.
No, definitely not. But yeah, I've seen that so many times where there's a clash, or just it's not a good fit, but you don't want to lose something almost. And then when an individual leaves, they end up finding a much better opportunity and end up being much happier, and it works for those parties much better. So
yeah.
What would you say is the dumbest money mistake you've made?
I'd say there's two. One is sort of short-term and one long-term. One is, I think, the first time I did try to take some money and invest it, I was so ignorant. And I listened to some financial advisor in some bank and had no clue what I was doing. I was too afraid to really look into it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a really bad year to try and do that. It was one of the crisis years. And was my very first investment, and it yielded a significant loss. And it's not the end of the world. I think the dumb part is that I really had no idea what I was doing, and I just didn't want to know. It's like, okay, here's money, do something with it, which I don't think ever works. Long-term was probably, I don't know, not starting sooner. Just saying, okay, here's some money in a savings account. It yields nothing. It doesn't grow in any shape or form, but I just want to know it's there and not risk it. And I think there's smarter ways to keep money safe, but still, have some growth to it, have some yield to it, and just learn. Learn. Like, all these years not investing and not trying to do better financially is also a loss of opportunity to learn. And so, I'm trying to catch up a little bit these last couple of years.
Yeah, makes sense. Take that same curiosity that you've exhibited in other areas and business and talking to mentors and applying it to this new arena.
100%. Yeah.
this may be a tough one based on our, our conversation so far, but what's the most frivolous way that you've spent money in the past?
Mm. The funniest thing comes to mind, which is like upgrading flight tickets. It's like incredible amount of money for an incredibly short amount of time, and nothing's left out of that except you have less back pain.
Well, long term that compounds, I guess, right?
Yeah. I don't know that I love that decision, but in the moment it felt great.
Fair enough. Yotam, you can take this however you want. It could be applied to Israel, US, but what would you say is the biggest challenge facing everyday Israelis, Americans, both, when it comes to finances?
I think keeping track is the biggest thing. It's why I think the fintech startup industry is going nuts the last few years, because there are so many sources of money changing hands that has to do with every single person.
Yeah.
The banks, the investments, the stocks, the mortgage, the payments that go to 100 different directions. Some of us have 401ks or other forms to keep track of. Different websites, different vendors, different banks. It's just keeping track of all of this is so hard. And I think when it gets overwhelming, you kind of just let it be and not look into it.
Yeah.
And I think that's why there's so many solutions out there now that tell people, hey, come and connect all your sources and we'll manage it all for you in one place. So I think once you get over that hump, a lot more is possible.
Yeah. No, it makes sense. If you don't know what's going on, it's hard to do anything about it.
Yeah.
Well, Yotam, this has been fun. I'll leave you the floor if there's anything that you want to share with the audience, and then obviously want to know if how folks can connect with you offline if you're open to it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very good keeping track of my LinkedIn, so you can always find me there and shoot me a message. I'm always happy to connect. Something to leave you with. I think try to find meaning, given what we're going through right now, how scary it is. It's a really life-threatening situation for everyone and such an extreme emergency. Try to find meaning. Gives us a little bit of comfort, a little direction, meaning in what you do at work, meaning in your goals for your career, meaning in your goals for anything, right? Your finances, we talked today, what you want your family life to be like, what you want your career, what kind of turns you're looking to have. Try to find meaning in that. Yeah. If you are intentful and taking steps towards whatever goals you may have, I find that the days are more profound. Every little thing is more satisfying. And really, I think that's what we're looking for. Looking to feel fulfilled is more about the path than the actual achievement of the goal, which feels good for 3.5 minutes, and then we want a different thing. And so, especially in a crisis, in an emergency, have some intent around what you're looking to achieve and also what you already have. And hopefully that gives a little bit of comfort and help us survive until the world gets a grip upon itself, I hope, very soon.
Yeah. Very, very relevant advice. So thank you for leaving us with that. And this was a lot of fun. Thanks for sitting down. I really appreciate it, and glad that we ended up connecting before all this happened and at the panel, because I really enjoyed the conversation, Yotam.
Thank you. It was an absolute pleasure. I hope even a couple words here or there that help someone with something would be very satisfying. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
All right, so that concludes my conversation with Yotam Hadass, VP of Engineering at Electric. And as you can tell, Yotam has a lot of experience building remote teams. He's done it successfully and knows how to optimize teams for the individuals that are there. Each team is unique, each team is different. But what I really love about Yotam specifically and what he described is the fact that he's willing as a leader to say, you know what? There's times where I don't have the answers. I have weaknesses. I'm not always feeling confident in my decision making. And by doing that and recognizing that as well as vocalizing it, he allows others to help fill in his knowledge gap or to solve for his weaknesses by maybe finding someone else that is strong in those areas. And I think that's really important as a leader, because pretending that you have all the answers or that you know all the answers is foolish, in my opinion. And being able to admit that you need to get more information is actually a sign of strength, because it allows you to go find that information versus, assuming that you do or pretending that you do and acting anyway and just hoping for the best. So I hope that you enjoyed today's conversation with Yotam. And that's it for the Silicon Alley podcast. I'm William Glass, CEO and co-founder of Ostrich, and of course, your host of the Silicon Alley podcast. Thank you so much for being a listener or watcher, if you're on YouTube, of the Silicon Alley podcast. It means the world to me, and I hope that you enjoy and have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks so much.